hanging out here with the cats.
Just for full disclosure.
LNTEOW, labor and the expression of worth. Together, we are discovering our common work, common stories, and common love.
When there's an ocean between us, I'm on the distant shore. I'll never stop fighting for your love, 'cause your love is what we're fighting for.
Most people do not understand the complicated machinery of the government. They do not realize every citizen silently, but nonetheless certainly, sustains the government of the day in ways which he has no knowledge. Every citizen, therefore, renders himself responsible for every act of his government.
And so what we're really talking about is this differentiation between intelligence and knowledge. Right?
Yeah.
Intelligence is about evolution. Knowledge is about fitting into a system.
We're not trying to pretend we know something when we don't know something, but at the same time we share what experiences and things we have learned, being willing to even question those things. The Socratic method, it's like Socrates, the danger he was to Athens was his questioning. And that's going to be the very tool, the very instruments we need. We need to question everything. We need to question. Don't just accept things as they are. Question. Okay, what is intelligence? What is being authentic? What makes us different from artificial intelligence? What is a university? Where is the university?
Speaking and writing all comes from this universal, fundamental expression of nature that comes through us, because we are that as well. You know, it's not like we just watch the fire. We are the fire. We are the fire. The Hebrew language and the glyphs that are in the Hebrew language were formed out of the shapes that fire flames make. And that was, developed over God knows how long, people just literally interacting with fire and developing this descriptive language that comes from nature itself. And then, when I started getting into fractal concepts and the holographic nature of reality, it did make sense to me that there should be some, universal expression of nature that we can recognize in pattern, just like we see the Fibonacci sequence in shape. There has to be some sort of pattern that exists that way in the audio world. These glyphs that we talk about not only exist in fire, but they also exist, above our heads in the actual galaxy as expressions of nature.
Excuse me just a second. Dan is knocking on the door. I'm gonna let Dan in. Save that space. Dan Greathouse, are you here, brother?
Just for full disclosure, this is our fourth member today. This is Sonny.
All right, Sonny.
Oh,
hey, Dan.
Hey, it's great to see you guys, man. And I'm just hanging out here with the cats, and Eli is somewhere running around in the house, probably going to come over and scratch my leg in a minute. And I have to admit, even though I've assessed human intelligence for 25 years in formal, public school settings, university settings, and even for children and preschool age children, that I can't speak with any authority about intelligence. It's like the very definitions of things have to come into question. I have some ideas about what intelligence is.
if I'm going to be a composer, I study composition. So that's the conservative element. I went to music school, and at some point I had to just unlearn just about everything that I learned at music school. At some point I was like, I've got to get out of this place if it's the last thing I ever do. That's my relationship with institutions. Is I move into institutions, and I have this capacity to respect what's going on there. I listen to my teachers, and then at some point, no matter how much I'd like to just kind of join the family and stay, I have to go. For instance, in when I'm working in centralized medicine, I'm a healer, certainly, and I loved working with all of my clients. Like there was
maybe I could ride straight through to my destiny, like a highwayman. The best of me seems to be on the road when my future's laid wide open. All right.
See that young man there in the police officer's uniform? He's the one who wrote that song, Cruise Control. It's Traveling Trav. He wrote that song on the highway on I-40 between Oklahoma City and Amarillo. That young man felt betrayed by both church and state. His friends had told him that, he probably shouldn't wear a police officer's uniform, but some of his brothers in Christ was police officers, and he went on a ride along, and he was like, oh yeah, I want to answer a call. I want to be in service. Oh man, beginning of a long journey. I saw miracles happen sometimes. I saw healings happen. And then sometimes I also had to learn what it was like just to not have anything to offer. Because ultimately, in those 8 years, what I learned, all I can really do is empower people to go on their own healing journeys. And I think that's one way I can describe what we're doing here and what happens between us here at Authentic Intelligence University.
And anything that I share can be brought into question. I'm not so proud or so haughty that, I can't be challenged on anything. But, just that very basic thing, the communication is important. And without that firing just in our own physical brains, we can't even come up with thoughts. And so then there's a firing that happens between us with our verbal abilities. And then the written language even expands our ability to communicate because of the written language, we're able to read texts from our predecessors, whether it's, the Pentateuch or it's the, whatever written language there is before us, we're able to glean information, or our own existence can be impacted from people that are no longer even alive, as opposed to like an oral tradition. Well, an oral tradition has a place too, and so the communication is the key for any type of a university setting, and communication is essential for intelligence. And I guess some of the problems that we're facing right now is it authentic? I mean, these are questions we need to ask. Is someone's communicating to me something? Are they being authentic with me? Do they care about me? Or are they trying to? There's a lot of con things that are going on in our world. A lot of confidence. People gain our confidence, and they really have no interest in us. They have just interest in selfish things for themselves, and they will use us or whatever. You know what I mean? Does that kind of make sense, fellas?
Everything you're saying makes sense to me. You used the phrase "in the beginning" earlier, and I love it when that phrase shows up. It reminds me of "in the beginning, God created." Also, "in the beginning was the Word, and with God, and the Word was God." And origin stories, right? And so
wow.
we have this group has an origin story that we can explore, and Michael's already been talking about origins of language. Michael is you're like the word. I find Michael to be an incredibly inspiring human being. One of his deepest questions is, what about humanity? Michael has been communicating his deepest questions to us, and what about humanity is one of them. Although I never met the man, I remember Michael's grandfather because of the stories I have heard through Michael. It was Michael's incredibly intelligent grandfather who built the physical world, the neighborhood, the kingdom into which Michael was born. It was his grandfather who helped Michael come to his first 12-step meeting. And now Michael, a man of Hopi descent, sits here with us asking us this question, which I believe is of the utmost importance. A question that I have also been asking myself in one form or another for much of my life. What about humanity? Michael is gifted, and Michael was gifted. Michael was born into a world where it was safe enough for him to ask his family and his community what is possibly the most difficult question that we have to face today. What about humanity? Michael's grandfather understood the wisdom contained in the 12-step program because those steps had once saved his life, and it was his grandfather who directed him into the 12-step rooms which is where Michael met Dan. And it was the 12-step work which empowered Michael to direct that most difficult of questions inward. What about my humanity? Where have I failed humanity? Where have I failed my fellow human being? What is my part in this? In the 12-step program, we call this process a fearless and searching moral inventory. 4th step work. And we recognize that this process requires the support and wisdom of community. We ask ourselves, what part have I played in forgetting my own humanity? In the 4th step, we are empowered to become simultaneously the plaintiff and the defendant. If I am in the least bit qualified to tell Michael's story, it is only because I have been listening to Michael's story very closely, and I have noticed the similarities between his story and mine. One of our most recent AIU activities involved a viewing of the movie Roman J. Israel, Esquire, a film written and directed by Dan Gilroy, in which Denzel Washington, certainly one of the most profound actors of our time, in my opinion, plays the leading character, Roman J. Israel, Esquire. The movie starts out with a foreshadowing scene in which we are introduced to our main character, Roman J. Israel, Esquire, a lawyer who is building a case against himself. The case he is going to submit to the Supreme Court of Absolute Universal Law. And Roman J. Israel, Esquire is the defendant, and Roman J. Israel, Esquire is also the plaintiff. And the notice is to permanently disbar Roman J. Israel, Esquire from the California bar and the human race for being a hypocrite and turning his back on everything he claimed to actually stand for. Gross moral, ethical, and criminal conduct that Roman J. Israel is accusing himself of and defending himself of. At the end of the movie, he says, "I'm the defendant and the plaintiff simultaneously. I file against myself. I represent myself. I convict myself, hereby expanding the full scope of the legal desert because the judgment is built in. The only thing left is forgiveness, and I grant that to myself. An act doesn't make the person guilty unless the mind is guilty as well. Of course, I expect there will be challenges," he says, "as there's no precedent or derivative interpretations, but the argument is sound, the premise true. I have no doubt it will be upheld by any and all courts of law. I've never been more clear," says Roman J. Israel, Esquire. He says, "My entire defense will be based on the unequivocal recitation of the truth." In the 12-step program, we have 4th step work, which is fearless and searching moral inventory. And in the 5th step, we admit to God, we admit to ourselves, and we admit to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And therein, we receive this forgiveness that so beautifully rises from within. What does a man do when he has discovered time and time again that his moral, intellectual, and physical fiber was not sufficient to keep himself afloat in the tempestuous ocean of life? When, despite all of his desperate efforts to keep his head above water, he finds himself underwater and fighting the urge to take that next breath, which will certainly be his death. And now I am reminded of the Robert Redford movie, All Is Lost. Check it out. What does that man do when he clearly sees that he is a hypocrite and guilty of betraying everything that he said he stood for? What does a man do when all his honest efforts to be of help and all of his efforts to reach out for help serve only to make him vulnerable and helpless, condemned by the very culture that he so unconsciously agreed to, the culture into which he was born? Well, he must convict himself. As Roman J. Israel Esquire says, I'm the defendant and the plaintiff simultaneously. I file against myself. I represent myself. I convict myself. He says, the premise true. I have no doubt it will be upheld by any and all courts of law. I've never been more clear. My entire defense will be based on the unequivocal recitation of the truth. Hi, my name's Trav. I grew up and I came of age in a culture which has forfeited its initiation ceremonies for its own selfish consumerism, and I have to take responsibility for that. How do I take responsibility for myself in a culture that values knowledge above authentic intelligence? Authentic Intelligence University. The truth is in the building.